Welcome to the Future of Jobs and Careers, where we take a look at the jobs and careers of the future and try to understand them. There has been a lot of talk about the future of jobs and careers in the headlines. I don't know if anyone's heard about the recent CEO of Anthropic and basically him coming out and talking about what the jobs and careers of the future might look like. He's saying there's going to be mass unemployment. I don't think that's necessarily the case, and we've gone through that quite a bit. There's job creation, there's job destruction. There's a balance there, and I think it's worth understanding and looking at. If you want to check out our 2040 jobs list, I highly recommend checking that out. But the thing that we can 100% guarantee is change. And when you're dealing with change, you got to understand how to change. And that's what we're going to be covering today is how to actually shape your career, how to design your career in this time of uncertainty and actually deal with it. So that's what we'll be covering. A couple of the future frameworks that are useful here, and we talk about these weekly in the Annovation community. So every Friday, we do the Friday Future Talk and basically try to understand what this might look like. And so frameworks that come out of that. So you've got 3 skills that you need for the next decade. That's entrepreneurship, your ability to spot, evaluate, and act on opportunities. Innovation, your ability to generate ideas, select ideas, and have an improvement process. That's your ability to iterate and refine over time. And then your understanding of tech. And that tech understanding, that's basically being able to look at the tools that are around you, understand where technology is going, and use those tools to get whatever it is that you need to get done. And when you're looking out at this future, there's really 2 phases over the next decade that I think are worth thinking about. There's this phase of AI productivity. That's 2025 to 2030. That's people getting more productive with AI and with these new tools and just using those in their work. And that doesn't come with any of the job destruction stuff. Actually, the job numbers came out pretty good this morning. And same with the World Economic Forum report, which we discussed in previous episodes. So if you want to learn more about that, go check those out. Those are back in other Future of Jobs and Careers. And then we've got the age of robotic automation. This is that time period that we're a little more uncertain about on jobs, just because like if you're a driver and you have autonomous vehicles running around, that might be a little difficult for you being a driver, but there are iterations of your job and things like that. And that's 5 years out. So think AI productivity and robotic automation. Robotic automation, 2030 to 2035, and understanding how that might impact your job in that time frame. So you got 5 years, and that's why we're talking about this today. So how to design your career. We'll be covering how to design your career, the risks of employment, and the tactics to shape your career. All right, now let's introduce the faces that you see on camera here. So I'm Alec Kaufman. I'm the founder of Annovation. I do tech and strategy for small businesses, and Annovation is really all about understanding technology today to help you achieve a better future tomorrow. And now I'm going to hand it over to Aoife. Or no, Scott, sorry.
Well, good day. This is Scott Jacobs with Jacobs Strategic Group. I'm here today as I work with numerous job seekers, and this is a subject near and dear to me. Thank you.
Hey, Aoife?
Hi, Aoife Holden. I'm the founder and principal of Saoirse Consulting and Coaching. I empower leaders to transform and thrive. And as Scott mentioned as well, as an executive coach, I work with a lot of people in transition, and that this certainly is a relevant and very hot topic. There are a lot of people thinking about how do I build my career in this uncertain market that we find ourselves in. I am delighted to be here and of service today, and hopefully our audience can get some meaningful tips about how to do that from this.
What these two also haven't mentioned in super good detail is they are experts at career coaching. So if you need help shaping your career and figuring out how to do that, definitely talk to these two. They will help you out.
Thanks, Alec. We're excited to be here.
Yes.
So, Aoife, I'm going to turn it over to
Can I
you
dive in?
dive in and just give
Okay.
us a little bit on some of the risks of employment, our first topic, and then we'll go more into those tactics in a little bit.
Okay, so we're going to dive into a topic that is really resonating right now, right? I mean, how do you truly build a fulfilling career in an uncertain market and where the traditional trajectory, right, it just doesn't work anymore? I'm going to share some facts. So, first, let's just acknowledge there is a common feeling of workplace dissatisfaction. A recent Gallup poll from November 2024 revealed that 51% of US employees were actively looking for or watching for a new job, and only 18% were extremely dissatisfied with their current employer. 18%.
That's an amazing statistic.
And I have another one. Well, this is from 2013 from Gallup study, but I think it's still, I still feel it's relevant today. There's been other numerous studies supporting this recently. They found as many as 70% of working Americans were unfulfilled with their jobs. So the question is, right, why is this happening? And how can we take a different approach to build a career that provides lasting purpose and resilience? So today, for those of you who are here, we're going to dive into this, why this is, and how do we take a different approach, not just to find jobs, but how to build a career that has a lasting purpose and is resilient to these uncertain market fluctuations. So we've got a lot to cover, and I just wanted to preface it. There's going to be three parts to it. Today, we're going to talk about the risks involving the typical traditional corporate ladder, right? And then we want to talk about how do you build a meaningful career, not just a job, but a meaningful career. So that's what we're going to talk about today. But a teaser for part two of this, we're going to dive into how do you build influence, negotiate, and deepen relationships, right? A key part of building a career. And then the other key part, as we all know, it's here to stay. It's not going away. How do we stay up to date with tech, right? There's a lot of talk about AI, very relevant tool. Anytime these waves of technology come, it's very important that you learn these skills. So, how do we do that? So, we're going to dive into that. And the third part is putting this all together. And then, how do you build your brand? Who are you, and how do you, as you go to project yourself out there in the marketplace so people know what your story is? So, let's dive in. Let's start off and let's talk about the first part, a traditional career. So, I have a question I want to put out there to you all. So, why is it so many people feel unfulfilled in their jobs? And how does the old idea of a linear career path contribute to the dissatisfaction? What are your thoughts on that?
First of all, I want to thank you for doing that overview of what we're going to be covering, Aoife, and the fact that you're spot on. The way that people develop their careers through specific jobs, promotions, and their commitment and loyalty, in many cases, to the company and to the employee is something that is of the past. We can all wish it was true. We could all hope. I think that the best way to even establish that today is to embrace entrepreneurship so that you yourself can have control over your own career. In the other sector, today's business is changing so rapidly that if you aren't up on all the skills that you need to elevate that job position, to elevate that company, and to keep them relevant, you're going to probably end up being a job hopper. And with that said, though, I think the corporate ladder scenario is becoming less and less that you start off at the bottom and you work your way up to the presidency. I mean, there's many historic examples of that, but unfortunately today it's less and less likely.
I think that's pretty spot on. Like, if you're trying to understand what people are feeling like they're lacking when they're in these corporate jobs, understand where do they flee to? When they leave that, where do they go? And they typically go to these entrepreneurial opportunities where they have more control over their day. They're actually able to dictate their hours, their rates, things like that. And I think that is what it's kind of a flight to freedom, basically being able to actually not be controlled by a boss. Because the boss, that scenario where someone is dictating all the work that you have to do for 7 hours a day, 8 hours a day, 10, 12 hours a day, depending on what that work life is like, is it's not great. I think it's just a lot of people don't like that feeling of not having that control. And maybe there is a middle there in a way that you can have something that sets you up to feel more entrepreneurial about your work, and maybe ways that businesses can empower that for their employees. but I really hope that I really feel that that's what a lot of people are looking for, and I hope that they can find it at some point in their life if that's what they're looking for. Now, that doesn't mean everyone has to start their own business, but maybe you can take that entrepreneurial mindset and you can use that to navigate in your corporate job too.
I love what you're saying, Alec, there, because I agree with you. I think there's the option of being an entrepreneur, but there's also being entrepreneurial in your current job, right? A lot of times when clients come to me, it's a situation of where they're unhappy, right? They're looking for some type of transition, but there's a lot of fear behind taking a leap, right? And so, is there a way we're going to talk about this, but is there a way we can take some small leaps, maybe some small steps in that direction in order to build a meaningful career? And maybe you could still have one foot in your current job, but taking that entrepreneurial spirit to start looking at other opportunities. And also, just that point about a linear career, because of course, after I graduated university, I thought, well, that's the way it's supposed to go. That's my identity. And I had to let go of that when I became my entrepreneur because I realized I could be of more value being an entrepreneur and being able to do multiple things that I love to do and serve my clients. It's also the fact that if you look around, right, I think about intergenerationally, you see people changing jobs all the time. And I remember when I started in the workforce, there were people in their company for 20, 25, maybe 30 years. I mean, I think that's a rarity to find that anymore, right? Because we grew up in a world where people were laid off, right? There wasn't that job security, that traditional trajectory. You move up in the organization, with that comes benefits and comes a level of security. So let's just acknowledge that's not how the career trajectory is today. The other part I think about as a woman, I do think about some of the systematic barriers that do exist because I've seen this with some of my clients who are at that crossroads, and also my male clients, right, of deciding to have a family, thinking about I don't want to give up my job, but I'm concerned that if I choose to have a family, that I may need to give this up in order to be able to be there or be present for my family. So I do think we need to address that. And I've seen statistically where a lot of specifically women drop off the workforce in middle management because of that family obligation. And how do we keep more women in the workforce? Are there ways we could organize jobs to allow for that level of flexibility? And I think they also, my husband and I are 50-50 on how we take care of our kids. So is there a way to allow for some of that flexibility in jobs as we look to the future? So those are some of the things to think about. So getting into sort of meaningful, right? The meaningful career, the question I have with that is how should we be thinking about building a career instead? And how do we figure out what kind of work is truly meaningful to us?
Well, let me comment before I jump into the meaningful part. I think that people are looking for a rewarding career that aligns with their values and priorities, and that whatever they're focused on, whatever industry that is, that it allows for some positive output to the world at whole. But I want to back up for just one moment, if I may, specifically around one other layer of why things are very different than they were in the past in regards to careers. One thing that strikes me as a late stage career individual with multiple adult children is the fact that from a risk taking perspective or your commitment to that job, you know, I had 4 children before I was 35, okay? And, my children I have children that are 35 years old and don't have children yet. So what's happening is a lot of people are putting off starting a family till later in life, which gives them a lot more flexibility. Alec and I were talking offline about this, that they have a lot more flexibility to do what they want, to experiment, to try different jobs. I just met with a client this morning specifically. He had been in the printing industry, specifically working in sales, but he realized that he really loves project management. Project management, seeing something go through the process in an organization, creating an output that will satisfy a client. And so I think there's a discovery that today, whether you're a job seeker or you're employed, I think there's a lot more time and effort and prioritization put on that versus when we were always just running, in a sense, driven to make more money. And today I look at it as what are the young professionals drawn to? And there is a specific difference in that. I wish I would have identified that earlier in my career and embraced that more holistically. But most of the young people today are not chasing just the dollars. They need a fulfillment of their job in many different aspects to change those statistics that you just mentioned earlier, Aoife, to move the needle on job satisfaction, I think is not only a positive and it will keep employees there longer, but it's also mentally healthier. If you go and do something every single day and you dislike what you do and you don't like your job, you don't feel like you're being respected, you don't care for the relationship you have with your boss or your peers, that is not healthy long term. And for those who are blessed to have the opportunity to do something that they really, really enjoy and they can contribute is a wonderful thing. And we just got to get more people to achieve that.
Well, and I think we know, I wish I could pull out, of course, another statistic here, but we know that more money doesn't necessarily correlate with happiness or emotional
Correct.
well-being, right?
Correct. I have to agree.
And it's also just, what do you wanna sacrifice? I mean, that's the big one. It's like, yeah, you maybe could get more money, but if you're sacrificing your mental well-being, emotional well-being, even physical well-being, depending on the job, it's like, that's not worth it. For a lot of people are looking at that trade and they're saying like, "I don't know if that's worth it." And also, one of the things is the ability of the job to influence your life is increasing, because the job doesn't just stay at the office anymore. It follows you home. It then is basically always on your phone, and people are able to reach out to you at all times, pretty much wherever you go. There are more and more limited ways that you can disconnect truly. And you need to find a job that actually sets up those boundaries if those are valuable to you. Some people don't value that, but it's probably good to find a job that has those boundaries, that actually allows you to not work at periods of time when you don't want to be working, and doesn't have a culture that tries to interrupt more and more aspects of your life.
Well, and I think this gets back to sort of, I want to talk a bit here about meaningful work, right? Because that can translate differently for multiple people. I would say that I am guilty of sometimes the 24/7, but I also love what I do. So even when I'm offline, I'm reading something about, related to coaching or whatever the case may be, because I love what I do. So I want to just break down some of the aspects, and if we could add to that about what does meaningful work look like, and it varies by individual, and acknowledge that. So it could be something where it is a higher purpose or a mission or a cause, right? So that's what you're looking for. Where there are actually some that relates to your values. There's something about the work. So I would say personally for me, one of the reasons I work in healthcare is that, I really do care about health. It has a meaningful impact to be able to make a difference to lives of patients for me is very fulfilling. And the other aspect we could think about is mastery, the ability to learn, the ability to develop and get better at something and build up that skill and talent. That might be something somebody is looking for. The other aspect I think is freedom, right? We've talked about that. Um, Saoirse consulting, Saoirse means is the Gaelic for freedom, and I purposely chose that because having that, what we talked about, that flexibility, you talked about that, Scott, having that flexibility, you get to choose your projects that you work on, you get to choose when you work, where you work, who you work with. And the other side is alignment. A lot of my clients are with shifting cultures in organizations. How does your values, what you value, does that align with the organization that you're in or the organization, what it's becoming? So those are some of the things that I'll let you, Alec and Scott, interject here about. What are your thoughts on that? Is there anything else you want to add here or any other things you could think of? But those are four categories I can think about.
We talk a lot about work-life balance, and it's basically you have work and you have life, but it's really just all life. The whole thing is life. You're living. It's just how you find a way to basically facilitate that income that allows you to do other things that you want in the economy, to do travel, to do whatever, to survive. Uh, hopefully not to survive. Hope we have programs that actually make it so that even when you don't have a job, that's okay. But work life stuff, I think balance isn't quite the right word. It's more like work life alignment. Because really, if you have a job that you like, if you have a way that you are generating this income in a way that is aligned with your life and what you want to do, you can just you can just live your life, and is your life ends up basically generating that income for you. That's the dream there, is that you don't have to have work life balance when you have a work that is truly aligned with the life you want to live.
Have a life strategy, right? Design your life.
That's ironic that you say that when we're talking about, you know, let's how do we design and our careers, but now we can look at it as how do you really manage your life journey, right? And your job or profession is just part of it, but it is a significant part of it. And how do we do it so that it aligns with your values? All humans may have a different twist on what their values are and how they prioritize them. And I think that that's why, as individuals, every job isn't for everybody. Every work culture is not for everybody, for sure. And I think in every, working for specific leadership types are important for you to understand before you accept that job or you take on this next new opportunity.
I would add to that too, to what you're saying is that life is cyclical, right? We go in cycles and things happen. Life happens what is it that's saying? Life happens when you're busy making other plans, right?
Yeah.
And I love that because it doesn't happen necessarily on our trajectory or record. And you have to pay attention to those things, right? In those pauses in your life that may shift how you see the world. And I wanted to acknowledge that and bring it out because I think this is meaningful to my clients is when you see if you look at nature, nature is cyclical. We go through seasons. Well, guess what? We as human beings go through seasons. I mean, and I have to refer back to my Irish culture and my Celtic roots here because the Celts really paid attention, right, to the seasonality of nature because recognizing as a human being, we go through that. We start off as a seed, we germinate, we grow into a plant, we die sometimes over the fall, and it has to be nurtured. So, there are phases of our life that we go through, and it happens over and over again, those different transitions. And I want to call that out and acknowledge it's okay that, when you're going through a transition, there are periods when you are ready and you're excited about your career and perhaps there's phases in your job where you're stuck and you're like this is not where I want to be anymore and that's okay. There's ways, of course I'm going to say, I mean, being able to move out of that, which is what we're going to be talking about today, that we can transition from that phase into finding something that's meaningful work for us and building a career.
Well, I think that's part of the value of what we do as coaches, as career coaches, working with people to help them identify where their strengths are, to have self-awareness of knowing what direction makes the most sense and allowing them to be more themselves as they pursue an opportunity rather than being what they think others want them to be. Imposter syndrome is not healthy. and it's not good in the workforce, and it's not good in relationships. And I think that exactly, Aoife, you said it very well, that individuals have to start to manage their career path, not just as a job. And how do they build upon them? How do they build from one to another? How do they identify and manage those systemic barriers or obstacles that are in their way, you know? And I think a lot of it has to do with a mindset that you can't control everything, but there's a lot of influence you could have on things. And another comment I want to make is that change is constant and your best laid plans can be disrupted by things that are out of your control, right? Whether it be an injury, a death in the family, the need to prioritize something else over your job next week. And it was never part of the plan. And I think that we have to have an open mind set in the fact that you're right, it's not going to be perfect. It's not going to go as I drew on the board, right? And things will change, but you have to be able to adapt to those changes.
And I love what you're saying too, Scott, here about adaptation, because in order to be resilient, you have to be willing to adapt. And one of the things we do as coaches is we talk a lot about experimentation, taking small steps. So I'd really love to dive into what are some of the practical steps that someone could take in order to shape their career and build that resilience. Because I would say our brains don't like uncertainty. As humans, we don't like uncertainty. There's a lot of fear that comes up around that. And if you think about it, unfortunately, sometimes as we become adults, that identity or that fear becomes more so rather than looking at it, reframing how you look at your career more as an experiment and how do you let go of some of that fear? What are ways we could do that? Anything else to add here, or before we dive into some steps that people could take to reframe how, instead of looking at their job, looking at their career, and how do they go about doing that?
Yeah, I wanna go over some of the traps here that people get stuck in
Hmm.
before we quite get to the tactics. I think there's a couple of traps in that, like, the corporate ladder is really good at, like, walking you up different points, but sometimes that ladder doesn't lead to where you actually wanna go, what you actually enjoy, what actually fills up your cup. So the corporate ladder very much goes from the ladder where you're maybe doing the thing, you're kind of the go-to person that's like in the dirt doing the thing. Then eventually you go up to more of a managerial role. Then you go to managing more people and more people and more people, and then you're at the top. Is that a fair overview, Scott, or would you amend the corporate ladder?
I would say that's a scenario.
That's a
Absolutely.
scenario. Yeah.
It's
Okay.
most people don't strive to actually end up at the top. They find a place where their skills and their abilities and their comfort is, and they end up staying there. The corporate ladder is something that's a great visual, right? But you might be striving for that position. Next thing you know is they hire someone from the outside to have that job, the one that you had been really yearning for. And I also think that from a corporate perspective, we're going to talk about more of it, but is there job security? Are your careers stable? These are things that people need to talk about recently. And also, is it okay to make a career pivot? Is it okay to be drawn to something new? A number of my clients, that's exactly what it is. They're tired of what they were doing before. They want to take on new things, but then how do they prepare for it? How do they develop some of the skills if they haven't done it before? And one thing I'm seeing societally is in higher education, there are a lot more certification programs to get a certificate in business analytics, to get a certificate in project management, to do these things that are concentrated versus going back to school and getting a whole new degree, but to prepare yourself. I'm not suggesting that somebody can just take a job that they're not prepared for. I'm suggesting that you have to be continuously learning and embrace those opportunities that you have. I just met with somebody this morning and he's been in sales for 5 years and he said, I really like project management. He's got a marketing degree, he's got 5 years of sales experience. But I said, so why would I hire you as a project manager? And then he dove down into the skills that he developed working as a salesperson and the processes he embraced that were transferable.
Yeah. I agree. Two things there, Scott. I agree. I think number one, there are actually people in the corporate who don't want to manage people, right? They're individual contributors. You said a project manager. They just want to manage projects. That's perfectly. And I think the second thing with that is looking at your skill set and saying what's transferable here. Because there is that other path that you could go down, and I see this with some of my clients. They need to get their MBA in order to do strategy. Perhaps there is some projects that they could make visible and let people know, I'd really love to participate. And now we're getting into some of the steps. I'd really love to participate on that project and build those skills within their organization, or let people know that they're interested in becoming a project manager, and where are some opportunities that they could dip their toe in the water and experiment with that. So people, they get to prove their skills in that area. So there's a lot of opportunity even within your own company to be able to do that.
There's two big traps here, which is one is basically if you love doing the individual contributor work and you're really good at it, you're probably going to get pushed toward manager. And if you hate being a manager, you should probably communicate that so that you don't get pushed into being a manager. So if that's being a manager is not what you want, don't go there, because they will push you there naturally, because that's the way that the corporate ladder works. Now, a lot of people want that status that comes with being a manager, but sometimes with that status comes something that they don't actually want. So that's one of the points there that you can get trapped in. The other is non-transferable skills. If you end up doing your job to the point where your job ends up being these things that are skills that you don't want for where you want to go. So it depends on where you want to go. But if you're getting the skills that are not transferable to where you want to go, that's a problem. And, that's where you want to start to notice that you might want to figure out how to make a pivot. Because if you're not learning the skills that you want that get you where you want to go, you're still learning those skills, and it's not going to get you there.
Well, and I think to your point, sometimes you do fall into that role and maybe it is not what you anticipated. And that's okay. That's now you've experienced that. You can start to sort of look at, well, okay, this doesn't isn't the right fit for me. So now where is it that I can go, and start looking at your skill set and what other skill sets you need to gain. Sometimes you don't know until you get there. And sometimes, like you said, what got me here won't get me there. So, like some of the things I do want to dive in, I'm looking at time here because I want to make sure that our audience gets some of these practical tips, because we have a lot of them of ways you could do that. So let's dive into some of that. So one of the things we talk about is having your own personal board of directors, I like to call it. So having mentors and having peers in order to get feedback and guidance. So you're here, you're like, this is not where I want to be. Start building your board of directors in order to get feedback, or look at people who have roles that you aspire to and talk to them about what is it that's meaningful? What are some of the challenges? What are some of the skill sets that I need in order to be able to do that job? So I'm paused there because I want to make sure, Alec and Scott, anything to add there. And we have several other ideas I'd love to share.
Yeah. I want to take it from board of directors and just say, who's your network and who are your mentors? Because board of
Absolutely.
directors sounds too corporate. Just kind of bring
Okay.
it down to who are
Mentorship.
your
It's just
mentors?
language.
Yeah,
That's
yeah.
all. Yeah.
So mentors and network. Who's in your orbit that you can use to help you shape your career to go the way you want it to go?
Well, I think the mentor piece is critically important because, and it doesn't over the course of your career, it doesn't have to be one individual person by any means. It is a gathering, a group of people that are open and honest to provide you with open and honest feedback, to address the questions and concerns you might have, and for them to share their experience, what they've learned on their way to achieve certain things. And that's one of the reasons that within career coaching we do a lot of informational interviews. We call them go out for coffee and learn from people that are doing what you're hoping to do in the future. And I think that that is a critical step that sometimes even job seekers forget. And I think it would improve the satisfaction of a perceived job that they think they'd be good at, significantly reduce the risk by communicating and having mentors in that space.
And I would add, I work on with my clients is helping them in terms of that career trajectory. So really thinking about, and Alec, you brought this up earlier, instead of just thinking what job do I want, helping them think about what life do I want? What does your lifeline look like, 5, 10, 15, 20 years from now? If you're 70 and looking back, like what is it you want to say to yourself? So this is a life strategy. And the other part that I want to acknowledge is just that, having that time to think through it. We don't often, I'm talking about the cycle of life. In that cycle, in the reflection time, we don't often take time out in our careers to think about where am I? Am I becoming the person I want to become? And where am I? And that's where, as a coach, we sit down and we talk through that and help them navigate that terrain. The other thing I do want to bring out is another point that's coming up is as you think through that, and there's some fear, and one of the fears is financial stability. I had a client this week who is looking at transitioning, but there is that fear of financial stability. So that's an example of one thing to think about. You know, do you have a cushion and do you have the psychologically the freedom to allow yourself to start thinking in that direction? Because that's one of the first steps is figuring out what you want.
I think that having a support network around you is critical and can help with that. I'm not no longer going to call it a luxury. I remember in years past, it would be a luxury to have a dual income family and the ability to have a little safety net. And now I think it is really important for people to have support around them so that for their happiness. I mean, we talk about job, we talk about life, but ultimately it is about emotional satisfaction and happiness. And we sometimes forget about that, you know? I mean, you walk up to somebody, "Are you really happy today? Or are you happy with what you're doing?" And everyone has different levels of satisfaction. What do they need to achieve, right? And to make those specific changes that will allow your career to progress while maintaining your core values and leveraging the skills that you possess. I think you made a comment earlier, Alex, specifically about great performers are tapped to be managers so often in sales, you'll see people tap the best sales guy or female to be the manager, to be the director. And it's tempting, but in many cases they fizzle out. You know, it's the best ball player doesn't always make the best coach. And we got to look at it that way that that there are different skills managing and managing people and communication, negotiation. One thing that we haven't talked about today, and I think we're holding it off, is the whole thing about empathy and listening. Totally, totally emphasized skill for management today, and it may have been less important 20 years ago.
That's super important because it's like where do you wanna go? And you have to listen to people to figure out where they wanna go. If that high performer wants to be if that baseball player wants to be the coach, then yeah, you should probably bring him over and say like, "Yeah, you're doing really good. Do you wanna start coaching some?" Maybe baseball player is a little bit of a weird analogy there, but same thing with the salesperson. It's like, if the salesperson's really, really good, you're like, "Do you wanna be the sales manager? Do you want to be the sales director? Things like that. And that's the question. You have that conversation. And if they say no, don't make them the manager. Because it's like, if they don't want to do that, don't force them into that because that's not going to help them much.
I see this in healthcare, right? Brilliant physicians that I work with were tapped in to take on leadership roles. And I know there are physicians who don't want to take on that administrative role. But oftentimes they might be put in that situation without a life jacket, without that coaching about now you're moving from a clinical setting to administrative setting that's very different. And so making sure that you can provide the support, I think there is a way to do it as well. If they're given some support, putting on that life jacket and helping them support them in that role and navigating the organization. There's all sorts of skills. And you talked about empathy as well. It's an interesting one because either you have it, but I think there are tools and training and coaching that you can foster your empathy. You can grow your capacity to have empathy for others, right? That's an example that you can build that skill. The other thing I wanted to bring up too is you talked about values. I think values is a great way to help you think about your non-negotiables, right? When you are looking to build your career, what are your must-haves, right? And what's your risk tolerance? And sometimes that risk tolerance needs to be built up, right? Again, getting back to maybe you dip your toe in the water and try something, and maybe you love it, maybe you don't, and that's okay. Maybe you try something else. You have to figure out it's very individual, meaningful work, what works for you, and that's authentic to you as an individual.
I mean, when that person comes and they're doing pretty well and they're like, all right, the next step is manager. And it's like, do you want to be a manager? And they're like, I don't know. Maybe figure out a way that they can experiment with it. They can try it out a little bit. They can get those pieces that help them build that skill up so that they can figure out whether that is or isn't something they want to do.
Yeah, I love that. Yeah. It doesn't have to be a yes or no. Maybe it's an experiment. Yeah, I love that, Alec.
Another observation that I have is let's twist it around for a second and talk about the companies that are hiring, mentoring, and promoting talent. Those companies who, and I'm going to say are with it, that understand the values of today's employment have adjusted their benefits to align. Many times have clients today, young people particularly, let's under 30 specifically, for them, valuing more vacation time is more important than, I'll say, health insurance. And I have a lot of people coming out of college that don't even understand the 401k benefits of matching, And so what I'm saying is at different stages of life, at different stages of your career, your priorities adjust as you grow. Income is just one part of this, right? The people I work with, the culture, the management style, the fact that we have this amazing 401k plan. I have a daughter-in-law who works for a national company and they have this unlimited PTO. Now that creates a whole flexibility.
Those young people must be those young people that still think they're invincible to not be valuing healthcare that much.
But there is many of them that don't.
So you bring up a great point, Scott. I know we're going to talk about it in part two, but I'm going to bring
Yes,
out the point here is negotiating, right? Just because the contract or whatever it is doesn't say it doesn't mean you can't ask for it, right? And it's the same
correct.
thing like that linear trajectory we talked about in the career ladder. It doesn't mean that you could, I think I want to get back to this idea of networking, deepening your relationships with people is sort of just, it doesn't have to be this linear career path. Perhaps you could start to experiment with different departments. I've had that experience with M&A, and then I built my own trajectory in that arena because I love doing it. So I think there are opportunities even within your own company to just ask and express your interest, and maybe there is something again to go over and work in a different department or explore that option as you are trying to build up your skills where you are.
I think it's step one, figure out where you want to go, or figure out the experiments you can take to figure out where you want to go. Step two, talk to people and have honest conversations of how you get from step one to step two, or from, yeah, to step one to where you want to go in step one.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I know one of the things that, we talk about is it doesn't have to be a bold move. It doesn't have to be necessarily leaving your job. Maybe, one of the things we're going to talk about is tech skills. Maybe there is something, maybe you can collaborate on a project or collaborate with something else or take a course within your current work environment if you can express the value that it would bring to your role. Yeah, so I'm being playing with this here. What are some things we could reframe this and look at it differently when we're stuck?
Use fear as a compass. What are you afraid of? And look behind those points. Because oftentimes, if you're afraid to have the conversation about maybe you want to do something different with your job,
Yeah.
look behind that curtain. What are you afraid of? Why are you so afraid? Are you afraid of the boss's reaction or the manager's reaction? If so, how do you mitigate that? Who can you talk to in your circle to get to like help alleviate that fear? Maybe you're fearful of them for a good reason, because if you did that, they would actually be like, "Oh, yep, this person's trying to do something different. They're out of the job." Like, and that's probably not a good situation to be in anyways.
Or the question is, a lot of times, Alec, we tell ourselves stories to protect ourselves, right? To keep us stuck where we are, because that's a protection mechanism. And sometimes getting back to what you said, talking to people or getting that support or getting a coach to help you explore like what's really this is about and having that support in order to take that step forward. And it's different for everyone, what those stories they're telling themselves are. It could go back, one of the things I do when we look at our life forward is also thinking about our life backwards and what are the patterns that and beliefs that we hold about things that keep us stuck where we are.
Great. That's a great position. Look backwards and forwards and learn from our past, how we did. I'd like to share a quick story that actually involved myself during my career progression. And I was working at a company, I won't name the company, but I was working at a company for 7 years, and I managed, the product management for $100 million in revenue. And I moved into a new category, and I brought this to the attention of the owner, and there was an emerging technology and product out there that I said, "We have to either build it, buy it, or strategically integrate to partner with it." And it was this fad, as he said, of internet banking. So the leader of the company, who I had worked for 7 years, did not embrace technological advancements. When he started there, the company was a printing company, and it finally went to software, SaaS software. But basically, what he said to me is, "Scott, it's a fad. No one's going to leave brick and mortar. I sure as hell am not going to." And so I realized that right then and there, as I looked for a strategic partner to integrate with, that my career journey was now going to need to make a shift. I worked there for 7 years, but now it was time to evaluate what's next. And I actually went to work for Intuit, a division of Bankers Digital Insight that made all the internet banking. And I went to work for them right after that and took the move because they were technologically up to date. I felt much happier there that I was with it, not a dinosaur. And so those are the little things that we as humans have to see. What do we value? Do we value being technically savvy, or do we value the safety of working at a printing plant? And I think sometimes we forget that because as soon as that president of the company denied what I saw as something real, something that was coming, I went, nothing against them as a company. I went, I need to elevate my career. And to elevate my career, I had to make a shift. So that's one of my little stories that I share.
Well, and Scott, what comes up for me is sort of innovation, right?
Yes.
You like to innovate and change, right? And I think that's sort of that's something where I value as well where I am. Like I like adventure, I like change. So, I'm just thinking about going back to what is it you value in a company?
Right. Yeah. I
Well,
love the fact you said
also
innovation, though. Go ahead.
that business is taking on risk too, that you then have to be associated with the company who is taking on that risk. And
Right.
so when you look at a company whose leadership is guiding them in the wrong direction, away from a technology that they should be leaning into, but they aren't. Um, there's a bunch of universities doing things like that.
With AI, perfect example.
Exactly.
Ignoring it.
So just ignoring it and just being like, we're going to be able to do the same thing for 5, 10 years. Yeah, no change has to happen here. But you see this clear change and you realize the leadership's not doing it. That's another cause for concern because you're in that ship with them. You're on this boat and you see the iceberg and they don't want to see it. And that's one of the big things I think that companies are just will sometimes miss, and they like to just pretend that things aren't happening, but it's like if your employees see the iceberg and you're still piloting the ship straight toward the iceberg, they will jump ship.
Absolutely. And
Start finding the lifeboat.
it was an unpredicted response that changed the trajectory of my career and forced a job change, in my opinion. It was that.
I want to leave a few minutes for some key takeaways, but I'm going to pick on yours here, Scott, what you had shared in terms of, you talk about adaptability, building resistance. You showed adaptability by understanding your values, and what was important to you. And also, this proactively taking the leap, right? In that moment, which is something that we've talked about, and taking those small steps and recognizing this is in conflict where I see myself and adapting to take that leap and look where it's brought you here with us today.
With a lot of learning over the
A lot
course
of
of my
learning.
career.
Yes, those transitions. And the other thing I wanted to add too, and was when we talk about letting go, right? It also requires you to let go of that job in order to take that leap, and that takes a lot of courage and bravery. So kudos to you. And getting back to that idea of you didn't take the linear path. You recognize this is in conflict, and you took the leap. And, getting back to, well, what was important to you, right? We talked about innovation. I want to just summarize. We also talked about thinking about what kind of company or job you're looking for. Maybe it's something that has your legacy, meaning, and purpose. Maybe it's freedom. Maybe it's something aligned with your values. So those are some of the things we talked about to think about today. But any other key takeaways or lessons that you're walking away with today that you want to leave with people?
I think you summarized it very well. A lot of the things that come to my mind we're going to cover in another episode, so I don't want to expose those at this time, and I want to be very cognizant of what time it is so that we can end on time. But I think the summary was really good. And maybe the next thing would be to do is just to remind our viewers and the people that are participating in what's next.
Yes,
What are we
what's
going to
next?
do next? Is that fair?
Lovely.
I'll add one more piece here, which is basically if you're trying to figure out the steps, it's figure out a goal. Where do you want to go? And figure out a path. How are you going to get there? Who can you talk to help you along that path? That's the steps. Keep that in mind. That's the easy framework to shape your career.
Wait, and don't settle, right?
And
There you
don't
go.
settle.
As I always say, go for it. Don't settle.
It depends on what you want. I mean, if you want to just sit in one career for as long as you can until, whatever happens, happens, like you can. But, I don't think most people necessarily want that. Anyways, you'll find out more in part 2 that is happening on the 20th of June, 2025, for anyone listening to this years in the future.
Yes.
And this has been the Future of Jobs and Careers. Send us your questions, your feedback, your thoughts on today's topics. If you're interested in being a guest or know someone who would be a great guest, you can let us know about it. Contact me or any of us. And then you can continue the conversation in the Annovation community That's where we have those weekly future talks and where we're just getting together to talk about the future. You can find that in the description if you're listening to this, or anywhere around the surrounding material for the podcast or the YouTube video, whatever you're listening on. Like I said, next meeting, 6/20, 2025. And we will be covering the skills and your understanding of tech, skills, relationships, and understanding of tech, and how that impacts your career.
That's going to be exciting.
I would add how to build influence and negotiate also, right?
That too, because you will need that. And then if you are listening on the podcast and you like what we are saying, share it with people, tell other people about it, tell your friends, tell your family, tell your dog. Dogs could probably listen to this at some point in the future, right? AI gets good enough at translation, makes human voices in a dog speech.
It was wonderful to participate. Thank you both. This was a lot of fun. I think it's a great learning tool. So thank you for producing it.
But seriously, share it with people and tell other people about it because it helps us out a lot. All right, that's it. That's a wrap. I'll play us out. Welcome to a little after the episode bonus section here. I just wanted to add a piece of wisdom that I was fortunate enough to receive at a young age, and I want to pass it along. And that is that you can do anything, you just can't do everything. And I'll repeat that. You can do anything, you just can't do everything. And so what that means is you have to be selective about what it is that you want to do and pursue that thing. And if you're chasing something for a lifetime, or you're chasing something with that tenacity, and you make that the thing that you're going to do, it's very likely that you're going to achieve it. Especially if you're a young person, you've got a lot of time to make something happen. Especially with the way that technology is going, too. I think the differentiating factor will be what you want to do, not if you will be able to do it. And if you really want to do something, you'll probably be able to do it. So figure out that thing that you want to do and chase after it relentlessly. I wish you luck.